Alright, so you guys were probably expecting me to be the last person on earth to make a YouTube video, but hey, I'm making another video. So today's video is on a PowerMac G4 QuickSilver. This is a dual 1 GHz model, which was the last model of the QuickSilvers and was the highest performing one with 2 megs of L3 cache. And I had bought it locally off of a kid. We have this page on Facebook that's a local buy-sell for our town. And this kid had posted a picture of a QuickSilver, and he said send an offer. So I sent an offer of $20, thinking that it was going to be like 733 megahertz or something like that. But no, it turns out to be a dual 1 gigahertz, and I bought it for $25. He said somebody was going to buy it for $70, and I'm like, no, nobody ended up buying it. He had come back to me the next day with the $25 offer. So I'm like, yeah, it's all mine. So here it is. Alright. So here we have a PowerMac G4 QuickSilver, and these had a different design from the previous G4s, which I actually have one right over here, but I'll just put a picture here and you should probably get a better sense of what they look like. And what these had was, here was a normal disk drive, which if you can actually get your finger in there, it would be a DVD or a CD or whatever you choose. And down here would be an optional zip drive. Now, if you had an MDD, which was a model after this, you could actually have another DVD drive down here and no more zip drives. You have your power button, you have a reset button, and then you have just a design aesthetic little white thing there. And you have a speaker down here. And the problem with some complaints of people who work at schools that had these was kids would be shoving like pencils in there and like popping the speaker. Now, the MDD had a speaker grill over it, but some kids were smart enough and still figured out how to get around that. So, I'll come back to just this in just a minute, but there's the side of that. And here would be the back. So, on the back of the machine, we have a dial-up port, because people still use dial-up apparently, even to this day. Up over here we have a headphone jack, or also known as a speaker jack. We have the digital audio port right underneath that, so if you had a special set of Harman Kardon speakers. Next you would have a Ethernet, that is gigabit Ethernet, so 100 megabits per second. Below that you have two FireWire 400 ports. You'd have two USB 1.1 ports. And then of course over here you have your power, your low voltage switch, and the spec sheet, or spec tag. And I'll put a picture of that right here. And you can see this model is actually made in the USA, which goes to Elk Grove, California. And they stopped making Macs there not too long after the introduction of the PowerMac G3. Going down a little bit, we have a Radeon 90 something. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, I can't remember. But it was out of my MDD before I sold it, where it had a ADC and DPI. Underneath that is an AC97 Sound Blaster sound card, which doesn't do anything with drivers or anything, but I was trying to get a line in because the QuickSilver doesn't have those, the MDD does. And anything prior to the digital audio G4 do as well. A 3-port FireWire 800 card with power on the inside if you want to power devices over that. This is odd. It is a stock, where, well, is an option rather, of a SCSI card. Now, they didn't sell SCSI hard drives in these since the G3 era, the blue and white era, but they still had them. And then underneath that's just two USB 2.0 port card, because these machines lack that, of course. And then, of course, we have the door that opens right here. Now, the first thing that's different about all the other MDDs and the 1 GHz QuickSilver is the heatsink. Now, on every other MDD I saw, there's the whole entire heatsink, and only the dual 1 GHz had the gap right here. This machine came stock with 1 gig of RAM, and whoever owned it afterwards had put in another 512 meg 6, so it's maxed at 1.5 gigs. Of course, here's that ATI Radeon card. I want to say it's a 9200, but it's not. Can't be. The sound card stuff, you obviously can't see this, but behind here is, if this camera is a lot more maneuverable, it's a Canon T4i. There are dual 80 gig hard drives in the back on the dual bracket, and that was stock. or an option as well. There's an airport card that was an option as well. And I think a modem, since that was an option. So that's pretty much an overview on the inside. Not much to tell, but this machine is pretty kind of top of the line. The only thing it didn't have was the super long graphics card and maybe, of course, max RAM. But for its time in 2002, this would have been a pretty beastie machine. So I'll go ahead and hook this on up and we can take a look at it running Leopard. So here we have the QuickSilver all booted up, and you can tell it's running Leopard. And just to look at the specs real quick, we have a dual 1 GHz PowerPC G4 with 2 megs of L3 cache. We have 1.5 gigs of RAM, like I said. Go ahead and look at more info. We'll find out what kind of graphics card is in this. So if you want to know the specs, those are. So it's 2 megs of L3 per CPU, so that makes it quite faster than the equivalent 1 GHz MDD, which I did own, and the QuickSilver blew it out of the water. Granted, the QuickSilver had less RAM. So it's a Radeon 9000, I was close, at 64 megs with DVI and VGA, which supports Quartz Extreme. And look under PCI cards. So it sees the audio card, but it won't implement it. Of course, the FireWire card, the SCSI card, and then the USB card. Look under USB. Tells us exactly what's hooked up, which is my optical keyboard and mouse. There is an airport card. It's an 802.11b, so I can't use it with any of my networks, which is unfortunate, because I have to run a power line adapter into the wall for power. For ATA, we have the ST3800, which is a Seagate 80 GB drive, and they're both in RAID 0 just for speed. You have no Bluetooth. Of course, audio is the built-in Texas Instruments. So I think that's actually, let's look at memory real quick. So memory, you can see that they're all full, they're all full. 512 megs of PC133. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and run a Geekbench on this, and I'll come back in just a minute with the results. Alright, hopefully you guys can see that. So we have the MDD on the left and the QuickSilver on the right, and we don't want 10.4 Fox right now, some other time. But we'll zoom in. Hopefully it zooms in far enough. This is the first time using this camera for video. You can see that each one run at 999 megahertz, and they're both G4s. Of course, the 7445 and the 7445 they're the same. Processor ID is the same. The L1 is 32 KB. The L1 data cache is 32 KB. The L2 cache is 256 megs for both. And the big thing here is the L3 cache, where it's 1024 KB and it's 2048 KB on the other one. And of course the MDD is PowerMac 3.6 and the QuickSilver is PowerMac 3.5. RAM in the QuickSilver, we have 2 gigs of DDR RAM, which I believe is running at 333 megahertz or something like that. Can't remember off the top of my head, while it's PC133 1.5 gigs in the QuickSilver. And looking here, you can see that the QuickSilver has a huge advantage over the MDD, and the only place the MDD gets a slight margin is in text decompress and Lua, whatever that may be. It was equal for the Mandelbrot, the dot product, the primality test, can't read it, sharpen image and blur image, but multi-core, of course, the QuickSilver spanks it. And I haven't gone down this far yet, but in the memory performance, the DDR definitely smokes the PC133, and the MDD scores in all of those categories. So that pretty much concludes the PowerMac G4 QuickSilver video. I've had this machine for two months now, maybe 3. I don't use it much. I would much rather use a G5, but if I need a G4 machine, this is my go-to machine. I have a digital audio that's by my feet on the other side that I don't use or do anything with, so gonna probably try selling it, but before that, I'll make a video. So stay tuned for the next video. See you guys.